everybody. Welcome back to the Brando and Joe podcast. Our guest today is Dr. Mike Chetta. He received his PhD in applied organizational psychology from Hofstra University, is a senior principal consultant and managing partner at Talent Metrics, and is the current director of the master's program of biopsychology at University of Central Florida. Welcome, Mike. Thanks for joining us today.
Not a problem, guys. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. The great Sai Islam introduced us, one of your partners in crimes.
Yes.
That is, we've had him on a couple of times too. So
The great Sai Islam, who's also an accomplished book author at this point.
yes, we love that book. We actually talked about it on one of the podcasts, and it's a lot of fun.
I'll be able to mention another one. Him and I are actually featured in a something that's coming out in about a month. So I can get into that now, or I can save that for later.
No, you could plug the intro of it a little bit.
Yeah,
I
plug.
didn't know
Yeah.
about that. Yeah.
Oh, so I guess in a little over a month, it's on pre-sale on Amazon now. ATD periodically releases a handbook for consultants. So Sai and I have written a chapter in the ATD handbook for consultants. It's kind of considered like the little consultant's Bible, especially because ATD is, along with SHRM, one of those organizations that people actually read and peruse those things outside of niche academic institutions and groups. So we did the chapter that's on starting your own business entrepreneurship. So that's something we were able to write because luckily our little firm has done pretty well, and we really harnessed, in our case, our PhDs and our experience in order to kind of get recognized. And on a little side note, I'll give them a plug. Some of that is because we also have the SIOP evaluation contract. So we run all of the membership evals for SIOP. We have for the last couple of years, and we will for the next few years, unless they decide to terminate our contract because they can't stand how amazing we are. But other than that, we should be good. So we know a little bit about consulting, and I know a little bit about IO, and apparently we know a little bit about writing books.
Yeah, definitely. And that's actually like a pretty good way for us to kick off the episode, talking about your guys' little consulting firm, Talent Metrics. So, kind of what led you guys to start that venture together?
So I think if anybody's listening who's either early in their career or even currently in a grad program, I think that thought comes through everyone's head, especially if you find yourself being business oriented. So for me, my path to IO wasn't a straight line. I also think that seems to be the path for a lot of people. Undergrad exposure to IO is not very heavy, but I did have a mentor who was an arbitrator and was into IO, but he definitely focused more as a clinician at points of his career and even experimental. He actually worked in Skinner's lab. So he was a very interesting fellow. So obviously IO wasn't his passion, but he liked research and he understood the value of being a consultant and doing arbitration. But I went and got an MBA, actually much like Sai Islam, and I wound up working in Fortune companies and doing management, but I quickly realized that it wasn't fulfilling. And I was like, I need to do something else. I did go back for the PhD, but then while I was getting my PhD, I also realized this isn't as fully fulfilling as I want it to be. And I said, you know what? I have all this knowledge, but I feel like I need to be able to implement it the way that I want to implement it, at least hopefully. And I think that starts those conversations about, well, what if I was self-employed, or what if I was a consultant? What if I could go in, share my knowledge, see something through, and then move on to something else new and as exciting, or new and exciting, I should say, instead of kind of. And I'm not trying to put any of that down in any aspect, but a lot of roles wind up just becoming administrative, like your 9 to 5 jobs. You go in, maybe if you're an IO in a corporate setting, you get to do IO, I don't know, 20% of the time, 30% of the time. But in grad school, much like even when I was working prior to going back for my PhD, I realized a lot of the work was just administrative and it wasn't as exciting as I would want it to be. So I thought, let's do consulting. And I met up with Sai and another one of our colleagues, Andre, who was also at Hofstra at the time. And we started spitballing who we knew, who we could reach out to that we'd worked with that like respected us and knew that we could do the work, and kind of explain that we were, we hung our shingle, as it would be, and just to say, hey, if you ever have anything you want help with or you think requires this knowledge, like, be more than happy to help you, no strings attached kind of thing. And luckily, some people really, really either appreciated our honesty and our how forthright we were, and they trusted us that if we said we could do the work that we would. And a couple of pretty amazing people at some pretty big companies took a chance signing contracts with us a little over 10 years ago, and it's kind of snowballed from there.
It is really great what you guys have done with talent metrics. So I like your talk about the SIOP part. I remember we were in size class our first year at Masters, and I saw that like pop up on the SIOP website, like talent metrics would be doing. Then I got to ask them some questions about it, and it is really interesting. And your notion on like students wanting to like be in consulting and maybe start their own practice one day is absolutely correct. We've seen it with a lot of the students at our program, and I feel like we've talked to students at other programs, and that's like a common theme of what they like to do. My question for you is because we've had the debate about MBA and IO psychology before on this podcast, and it's an interesting topic. But now that both you and Sai have both types of degrees in your work at Talent Metrics, do you find yourself like on a certain project, you're like, I'm going to draw from my MBA knowledge, or now I'm going to draw from my IO psychology knowledge, or do they like mix, or is it one like heavier than the other?
So I'll tell you, and I think Psy feels similarly, and I would think actually, and I know MBAs have changed, and like I didn't go to Wharton or Kellogg or anything. I went to a business school in New York. But I think your business, the MBA teaches you a lot of broad, more soft skills, very broad way of thinking. Whereas IO Psych, I'm like, no, I need to do something with assessment. Like, let me think about validity and items. So I feel like my IO knowledge is much more concrete, and I draw from that 10% of the time or 15% of the time to add the real value. But weirdly enough, the stuff in the MBA and like the polishing of my presentation, communication, soft skills, being able to like build trust and relationships with people, that I probably use 75% of the time to like kind of funnel the projects and like to project manage things that you don't learn in an IO program. Like I've never learned those things in IO. I've been able to take I had like 6 or 7 years of work experience and the MBA and just my work history working very entry level jobs for my late teens, early 20s, like most people. And then I was able to take all of that, and now that I have the IO knowledge, be like, oh, I can combine them. And also probably why I like IO, because I had so many different roles and I saw the things that could be fixed or should be fixed. So I want to be able to do that, but I don't think there's an IO role where you can do IO all the time. Like what kind of job requires concrete knowledge 100% of the time? Not much. You have to be conscientious, useful, communicative, be able to manage and juggle things, and then you have your spots where you add value. So I definitely feel like the IO stuff I wouldn't have been able to pick up on my own. Whereas maybe through work, while the MBA was great, I did pick up a lot of that concurrent to my MBA, or maybe had learned it before but hadn't realized it was valuable in business. Whereas again, yeah, the stuff in IO that I learned about assessments or about like delivering training or about analytics, that's much more tangible and concrete. But I think it's a good mix. But I couldn't tell you the breakdown. I made up my own because I just feel like it's ethereal most of the time, and then there's just little bits where I can demonstrate that I have a PhD or something that gives me this knowledge, but it's not useful for everyday normal conversations with clients and for work. You have to pick your spots, and it's more about storytelling and building relationships in consulting, which is also hard. As you said, a lot of younger people want to do that. It's very hard to start unless you have contacts and the very very effective soft skills. Which again, I guess for myself and even and Sai Islam was that we had worked before, we had the MBA, and we were a little older going back for the PhD. So we were kind of like relatively roughed out already. And getting the IO PhD just made us more useful, and we had more value and more science to bring. But we already had the skills to function in business. It just made us, and again, in my opinion, just super knowledgeable to actually implement things and make change, as opposed to making change for the sake of making change, which is what I feel like they teach you in a lot of MBAs programs. You can do these things. Jack Welch did it 30 years ago. This one company did it, but I wouldn't be able to express to you why it worked or how it could repeatedly work. And then when you get the IO degree, now you're like, well, I can test that. I can show you the ROI. We can make changes and evaluate efficacy of programs. Something that, again, we didn't do, at least in my MBA program. Science was not the focus. Salesmanship, finance, and economics was the focus of it.
You know, I loved all of what you just said there. I think it provides a lot of value for like the intertwining of IO and MBA. Um, I want to go back to something you mentioned early on about like what you learn in an IO degree versus what you get in an MBA program, and specifically tie that to your role at the University of Central Florida. So one, I will we'll go back to metrics later, but a question that I had about that was like, as a director in an IO program, having that MBA knowledge. Joe and I have talked about it on this podcast, and he already alluded to the MBA versus IO episode we've done. But we've alluded to the fact that like a lot of IOs come in with less business acumen. So is that something that you're trying to build up in the program there in Florida? Or like how are you kind of seeing that transition for students who are coming to get their masters in IO and trying to get the business acumen that they need when they might not have it to come in?
So I think that's a really good question. I think for me, I'll jokingly say, maybe much to the chagrin of some of my colleagues in the department, UCF's IO programs, the masters and PhD, we have like some of the best faculty in the country. We have had and currently have a bunch of SIOP fellows. People are getting a very large research grants. They've published a lot. They've even written books. They're renowned. Like people like Mark Earhart and Steve Jackson, Mindy Schoss, like people know them in our field. So it's like a privilege to be able to teach with those folks. But I know that their focus is definitely research and getting the grants, which is not, obviously my specialty is not writing grants. I can talk to another person and get a contract, but I can't get a grant. It's not what I do. But to be lucky to be attached to that program, we have the academic part of that very much down. We're a great program. We have the master's program has been around for over 40 years, actually well before I was born. The master's program, and the PhD I think has been running for well over 20 now, and they have I think we're up to like 75 PhDs graduated from that program. So again, we're teaching people IO stuff, so that's great. We know that they're going to be as book smart, theory smart as possible because we're a top institution. I felt like my role in taking over the master's program was, because it's a terminal master's, and while we have a thesis track and people will go on, and we have actually my student who I'm advising is finishing up, and he's going to be going to Hofstra in the fall for his PhD.
Hey,
Nice.
congrats.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
he's awesome. I'll give Josh a little shout out here so he can hear it. I'm very proud of him. A couple of years ago, another person in our program, she got accepted to Rice. I believe she's working with Eden King over there. So we can do that. Like we can churn out master's people to go for a PhD, and obviously the people who come into UCF who for a PhD come out and are very successful. But for those folks who are in the master's program and are taking the non-thesis track and want to become practitioners, I felt like it was a perfect fit for me because we can focus a little bit on learning about research, and I can give them essentially a mini PhD experience, but also bring in my MBA experience to make it a program that focuses on getting actual, like when I say applied experience, over the course of their couple of years, they were working with real clients on real organizational problems. Half the time, I don't know the problems with these clients. I don't prep them. We come in and actually consult for them. And sometimes we're solving way more broad business consulting issues that I jokingly say to the students, go figure out how to IO that. Like, go figure out how to see what their problem is. And if it's not just, we need training, we need selection, it's some other issue, figure out how you can add research design, measurement, and evaluation to it to structure it so that you can provide value and use the principles of IO in something that's not like maybe straight up I-side kind of stuff. So we do a lot of that. Myself and a couple of other faculty members really focus on building these connections with our alumni, and also being in Central Florida is not it's not a detriment. There's lots of businesses. There's like Lockheed and Grumman and NASA and all the hospitality, whether it be hotels or theme parks. We have all that access, so we have plenty of potential clients to work with. So I really focus on students getting that experience and kind of bringing the back and forth, bringing kind of both parts of learning the theory of IO, but then actual practice. And even in our classes, it's funny you say like the MBA. So I feel like we start out very IO. In the first semester, we're focused on systems and theory, and we're focused on the stats piece. We teach R in our program. I teach that class at the moment. So we do some intro R stuff. We're doing some measurement evaluation, research design. Like, that's great. You need that basis. And obviously, everyone who comes into our program has undergrad research methods, undergrad stats, so they have a solid background. And then in the second semester, we start talking more about job analysis and actually doing it. And maybe talk a little bit about like surveys and teams and other stuff. And as we move along, and maybe the next semester, Now we start talking about ethics of practice. And later on, we even talk about consulting. And as we go, the presentations and the papers and the work that the students do morphs more so to be shorter presentations, make them attractive, brand them with client branding or your own branding that you've developed. Make sure you tell a story. We're not interested in the science as far as how you present it. It needs to be in the background, but as you go along, the science hides in the appendix and we start bringing up more of the storytelling, because I know that, and it's not even 2 years, it's like actually 20 months from the day you start a master's to when you leave, 20 months, and they have to be business ready. On top of that, everybody's required in our program to get an internship, which I think aligns very perfectly with actually my experience at Hofstra. Was they wanted you to work and get practical experience, which I think definitely lets you know if works for you. And I think for masters, we know that they're leaning that way. They're probably not leaning towards research. So again, it would be a disservice to them, to all the students, to not have them get some sort of work experience on top of the applied experiences and mini consulting we're doing in the classes. And besides the way that I teach my classes, where I'm giving them examples and bringing in deliverables from my clients, and then explaining to them how we went about doing that. And then I have my colleagues also, most of them are applied, either come and speak to the class. Also, our university does like a couple of times a month, we have speakers come in, like alumni, and do brown bags or Friday informationals. I bring a lot of applied people because it gives them that experience. So I feel like they need that, not only to see the practitioners, but all of the practitioners I know very much embody a lot of the things that I picked up in the MBA, because they picked up those business skills, which are definitely not what 80 or 90% of IO programs are making their primary goal. It might be, a secondary or even a tertiary goal. But because I am a practitioner when I'm not there, and also, I guess we can go on the side note, a little aside. I never thought I'd be teaching full time, or being in academia, or being the director of a program. It all kind of just it all kind of just happened. Um, but I realized it was the way to reach the folks that I thought I could impart value to and help them build their careers. I always thought, well, I have a PhD. I want to teach in a PhD program. And I was like, well, I'm not the best researcher. I don't have the best experience in writing grants. I also don't really like sitting and working on the same thing repeatedly, which I think goes back to why I wanted to be a consultant. I wanted like change, fast paced. So I just, maybe I don't also maybe just don't have I have a touch of the ADHD. So just not the ability to do that. The research isn't as invigorating for me when I have to do it. I do research currently on AI, and I've done some other research, and I've actually worked in some urology papers and a bunch of interesting, because they're things I find interesting. I'm actually working on swine research with the swine industry now, about worker motivation to observe biosecurity and safety protocols, which is an IO thing, but it's in a cool industry. It's very interesting. So I'm motivated only to do things that are interesting to me. Whereas if I was teaching a PhD program, I might be required to do things to get tenure, or to do things that are expected. And again, we all know a lot of people with PhDs are going to go into academia, and that's fine. It's expected. You're not going to go to all that school and then like not take the literal one avenue of jobs that requires a PhD. You wouldn't be like, I'm going to get a PhD and just never look for a job in that area. I mean, I tried to do that, and obviously it didn't work out. You can't avoid it. Uh, but I think, again, for a terminal master's, with our focus and what I believe in my career has really helped like people like myself and Cy and a lot of my other colleagues be successful. I feel like I can impart that by going, there's science there, but definitely remember that the audience, talking to your audience or knowing your stakeholders, all the people in business, half of them don't even know what IO psychology is. So if you start hitting them up with facts that are related to science and research, people are going to glaze over. Just like even I sometimes glaze over when I hear about research because it's not my passion. Um, they'll hear the same thing, and they want to know, what value will you bring to the organization? Why is my money well spent? How are you going to fix things, which is another issue. Like, we're not fixing anything, we're not proving anything, but we're working towards a resolution, and we'll show you that we've made strides. I feel like with all of that said, then the master's program there, which was already an applied master's program, but it had the ability for me to be there and make it even maybe a little more applied. I think it was a perfect fit, and it's a reason for me to be there, because I do feel like we're a little bit of an MBA in its own right, because I think when our students get out, and I may jokingly say things like snake oil to them, and salesmanship. And we read a lot of like more general reading, New York Times bestseller kind of business and consulting books. But I explained to them that you need that sales ability. You need that ability to like tell your audience why what you do is important, not tell them that you are important. Like there's a difference there. And I feel like if you take the business approach, it's much more well-rounded and softer than going, I'm a scientist, listen to me. And it seems like, even though I kind of joked, I think my colleagues appreciate that balance, because again, on the other side, we have that covered. Like as far as staunch academic ability to do that work and be like really successful at that, our faculty have shown that they're doing that. But definitely finding someone like me who is an academic, but really not. Like I don't. There's not many folks I think that are in my position where I've been consulting full time for a decade, and I continue to do that. And I bring the consulting into the classroom, but then at the end of the day, I am the director of that program, and I am being evaluated on my teaching. But I look at like I have two full time jobs. It's a very weird position to be in, because sometimes the version of myself crosses over. So I found that if I just find a version of me that's in the middle, it's the best version. And it's like, yeah, part salesman, part MBA, and then part PhD scientist. But at the end of the day, useful practitioner is probably what I am altogether.
I like that. I like that word, useful practitioner. It sounds good. And the program sounds like an amazing mix too between the soft skills that you kind of talked about from an MBA and IO psychology. Because I 100% agree. If you have solely just that IO psychology background and only the research, while important, it's hard to break into some of those roles where you need that some of that other knowledge. And I see some parallels like where you're talking about with the internship program at Florida and how we have at Hofstra. It's interesting you brought it up because we actually talked about it today on the episode that came out today, because we're recording this on a Friday, about the valuable experience an internship brings to your program. And it's like crossed my mind before, because I was like, should I have worked first before going to get my degree, or should I have just jumped right in? Because I know a lot of us are impatient and we just want to go right into
Yeah, yes. The answer is yes, both.
it.
Can't hurt to have the experience because it makes you more polished, but you definitely need it while you're there. And again, even in our PhD program, I obviously don't. I run the master's program, but Mark Earhart runs the PhD program. Before they finish, before you're even defending your dissertation, like you have to have some work experience, whether that's like applied research at NASA Army Research Institute, which is definitely for a PhD level person makes more sense. They have much more harder knowledge of statistics and research, and those organizations with their government contracts require that. Or simply teaching, or graduate teaching because they want to go into academia. You need that. It is a real disservice to teach people in a classroom and then send them out and go get a job when they will be interviewed and they won't even have good classroom experiences to talk about, let alone an actual real experience. But I feel like our students have really good classroom experience and some internships and other things to talk about. Can we make them full featured in 20 months? No, but we can make it where their answers to interview questions and their ability to express how they add value and how they've worked through a difficult project, applied IO in a way that was smart and unique, how they've been successful, how they've even learned from failure. We're giving them all of that in 20 months. So when someone talks to them for a job, they see that they have experience and value and maybe critical thinking and problem solving skills, which you can't experience if you're like, well, I got my degree and I only worked in the research lab. Like for our students at a master's level, that wouldn't be enough to make them competitive when they get out. And I want them to be able to hold similar jobs to people like myself. And they should be able to when they get out of our program, because they have a lot to talk about and they've already had like a mini work career by the time they get out.
Yeah, it's a great structure, and Joe, it's a good point about the internships. I think IO's interesting because you can job craft a lot of roles that might not be IO specific to have, I guess, like a longer tenure of IO experience, especially when you're coming out of grad school and you might be in your mid 20s, and it's hard to have like 5-10 years under your belt. But if you can speak to it in a way that sounds IO related, that could help. We don't want to run out of time with you, and there's a topic that we know you're very passionate about, Mike, and we want to make sure we have time for it. So the idea of like going for a PhD versus getting a master's in IO, we just wanted to kind of talk to you about it and hear your thoughts. When should a student go for a PhD? When should they not? What are your thoughts with that?
Okay, so now really, this is how much I've been embattled. So I will say that my viewpoints are obviously my own, and they are not representative of the University of Central Florida or any of its employees. So now I've covered myself with the state institution because these are solely my opinions. Um, they are my opinions and possibly the opinions of Talent Metrics. So that's fine, but not the University. Um, so for me, and obviously this is a weird spot to be in because I have a PhD, and the only way I could be the director of a IO program at the second largest school in the country that's attached to an R1 PhD program would be to have the PhD. So I understand the value of having one. The thing is, I feel like, and this is like some variation of this conversation or this little spiel I'm going to give you for a minute, is what I have with every student who says they don't know what they want to do. I say to them, do you want the PhD? And if I'll tell you right now, if the words out of their mouth are not initially some version of yes, then I tell them, then you have to convince me that you should get a PhD because the amount of effort and personal toll, and also the self-directed nature of like completing the dissertation, even at the most supportive of schools. And we all know, I'm sure everyone knows, the dissertation process can be very arduous. You're trying to coordinate multiple people to give you feedback. You're trying to meet deadlines, maybe while you work, start a family, living somewhere else. It's very difficult. If you're not set on that as your end goal, that could be 3, 4, 5 years of difficulty where there's plenty of opportunity to get disheartened, depressed, and sidetracked for sure. So I always tell people, first of all, do you want that? Some people are like, I'm the first generation to go to college. I've always wanted to do this. I want to be an academic. I go, well, obviously, then if that's your goal, you almost have to get the PhD because you'd never be able to, be full time at most universities without having that. So that's part of the conversation. Or they're like, oh, I want to lead research for a consulting firm, or I want to do research with the government. And I'll say, you know what? And maybe sometimes I'm saying that to them. But I'm like, yes, in those jobs, it makes sense. However, there's like 92% of the other jobs in IO that are out there that, with a lot of experience or a good amount of experience and a degree and the ability to show, and I keep saying this, that you have utility and value, you could get some of those same jobs that PhDs get. It's just going to take you a little longer because you need the experience, but you could work for 4 or 5 years while someone's getting their PhD and be at a pretty much even situation. At least in most corporate America jobs, because the PhD is great. People like it sometimes, but it doesn't carry the weight in the real world as much as it carries, obviously, in academic and research-based places. That goes without saying. Like, other people are doctors, they recognize the value. When other people aren't doctors, sometimes it actually, you're fighting that, which is a separate conversation you could have with me and many other people with the PhD. Of, I don't always tell clients that I have one. I don't always say it to them because it creates a weird power distance and a gap sometimes, and people don't want to feel like inferior or that you're talking down to them. So with that being said, there's value if that's what you want to do. If you want to work at a firm where that's valued, or hold a job where that's valued, or it's valuable to you as a human being, then you definitely want to do that. If you are unsure and you like working or would like to figure out if you want to go for a PhD, the master's makes the most sense. You can build up a relatively representative skill set. Like, let's say, let's pretend that a PhD person has all of the knowledge of IO in the world. Obviously, none of us do. But if they were 100, I feel like in the masters, you can be like 80% there. So if we can get you 80% there and you have some knowledge, you can learn a lot of other things on the job, but you'll be ready in 33% of the time. So maybe it makes sense for you to go out, especially if you like working and want to work in corporate America, to go do that. Why would you go get a PhD and spend the time, money, and energy if at the end of the day it's not going to help you meet your goals, and you won't necessarily have many more avenues to pursue for work? And again, obviously PhDs have a higher starting salary. They have different jobs, but again, that time can be made up with the extra few years of working. And I feel like for our folks in our program, and there's other programs that are very applied focused at the master's level for IO around the United States, that we're sending the students out there. and they're a pretty good match because they're a little road worn and grizzled and experienced, so they can compete not because they have more knowledge than somebody with a PhD, but because they understand how to apply it in a setting where you'll get paid for that. So that's fine with me if we can churn that out. Um, but it's case by case basis. Some people are really excited. Even my master's students that come in and go, I really like research. I think I could do like some cool work in some area I'm excited about. I'm like, well, again, then you're going to want the PhD because no one's going to publish nor read your work if you have a master's degree. Like if research or teaching is some part of your goal, then the PhD is valuable. I just feel like I am so passionate and excited about consulting, and it can be done very well with a master's degree. And also, even if I went to the most applied PhD program in the country, which maybe I did at Hofstra, there's still the idea that you will teach. So I just feel like that doesn't align as strongly with what burns inside of me. And again, I teach not to teach. I teach so I can help the future practitioners be better. Maybe my goal is different. Like I'm teaching MBA IO because I'm passionate about it and I want them to be successful. I'm not just trying to teach them to be book IO smart. So for me, it aligns better. Whereas I feel like in a PhD, you obviously have to make people pretty book smart. Like you have to learn a lot of stuff to earn the PhD. And I have all that knowledge in there. But at some point, for me, I brought in more of the MBA stuff and I made an amalgamation that worked for me. And I don't remember every author and I don't remember when things were published. But I remember that it does exist and I remember how to test things with science and I can bring that and make it valuable. And for me, that's the same thing every master's level person can do, which is why if you, especially if you go the thesis route, get a master's, do the thesis route so you set yourself up for the PhD should you want to go, but at least you can dip your toe in the water. And if life changes, which happens for a lot of people, or you get stressed, or you find out you don't want to go that route, you can get out with less money, less time, and less sadness than being locked in to a PhD where I'll tell you right now, and I don't believe I'm an ivory tower person at all, ivory tower of IO, but definitely it is kind of upsetting if somebody goes through and doesn't complete. Um, if you're ABD, which is not a real thing, as you all know, but it's kind of I don't want to see people do that. So I feel like you were good at coursework, you obviously are smart, but the dissertation derailed you most likely, and that's the kind of thing you can avoid by doing a much shorter thesis or going and learning some things about IO and then working by getting a master's. So I just feel like the master's could be everyone's step. It's just then you have to take another step of then applying for a PhD program and starting again. But I don't feel like the master stops you from much. Whereas once you get into the PhD, it would be foolish not to explore the avenues that a PhD opens, but you have to be passionate for 5 years of your life to do that. It's just after having gone through it and helping other people over time, again, if you're betting, I guess this is a very good way to like close it up. I feel like if you're going to hedge your bets and do things in life, you want to minimize difficulty and maximize success. And a good practitioner focused terminal masters or good masters in general can give you the same path, but it gives you the ability to change should you need to, which is always a good bet. You never want to lock yourself into things for a long period of time, especially after what happened over the last few years with the world situation. Maybe sometimes it's nice to be able to do something, finish it, reevaluate your life, and move on, because I think in all of our careers, we're all going to change jobs many times. So we're going to need different skill sets and we're going to need different knowledge and we need to apply it differently. So I think we all need just the ability to see the world and add value. And I think again, you get that from the masters in a much quicker dose. So that's my opinion. Um, but I think it provides value, and I think it's a useful mantra because getting a master's doesn't stop you from getting a PhD. And I think some people feel that that might happen, and I don't believe so. Not judging by some of the folks that we've had at UCF.
No, I definitely agree. You brought up some great points. I feel like sometimes we talk to students before that are like, "Oh, I'm just going to go get a PhD just because you can," and it's like it's there, and it's like, oh, you like you said, like the salary's there too, and it's a nice salary, and like I like these classes, so yeah, let me go get a PhD. But I like what you said about the time commitment and really loving the field of IO, because that's what you're going to be doing for the next 4 or 5 years and researching and publishing. It's a really big part that I think sometimes can get like lost in the wind, so to say.
Yeah, it is nice to feel the flexibility. It's also less defeating. I know this might be a good way, even a better way to close out. I think it's less defeating with an IO PhD. You probably don't want to necessarily work as in HR in like a more generalist or broadly in recruiting or other things because you're like, well, I got a PhD in IO. I could do more. I want to lead people analytics. When you get a master's degree, I feel like you're much more open to let me see how I can apply IO to recruiting, to my HR generalist role. It opens up more avenues because your expectations are different. So like the world's your oyster because you can float and become a chameleon and work different things. But when you get the PhD, you're like, yeah, I need the salary and I need a job that has this level of prestige or engagement for me. And again, that's going to limit what you do because your expectations are different. Whereas master's level folks are like, all right, let me see how I can apply this in a way that makes sense and I can navigate my career. And I think you were saying, you were alluding to it before, you can figure out like where you can bring in IO to the job you're doing. And again, you're not going to be upset because you have 5 years of knowledge that no one wants to listen to. You'll just be less upset because you have 18 months of knowledge that no one wants to listen to, which is good. It's less it's less depressing. And again, you'll everybody starts their careers and has to find their way. And I think that's fine. I just think, yeah, with the PhD, you're much less willing to find your way. And that can actually be harmful in your career and to people's psyche if they don't get the job they want after they put the 5 years in. Um, I think again, your expectations are just different with the masters, and it makes it where you can change and go forward if you want. Maybe you work for a few years, and if you don't like it, yeah, go back. Especially if you have a thesis done and you did some research and some work in your program, like ours. Our folks also have research requirement, which I kind of glazed over, but we have that as well. If you have that experience, you can go to a top-notch PhD program afterwards, but at least you have the option to change and do something else. So
Yeah, very very well said. I think it's interesting too. You brought up that point again about bringing IO into everything, and that's an interesting take, Mike, about if you go for a PhD, it could be a little more limiting. And I haven't actually thought about it like that until you said that. But it's a very good point to think about of like applying all that knowledge to whatever area you go into. It's a very specific amount of knowledge to have. Uh, we want to make sure we give you enough time to ask the same question we ask all of our guests. And that question is a piece of advice that you have for prospective IO students or early career IO students. What is one piece of advice that you would have for them as they're starting out their careers?
again, you should very, very carefully consider whether you want to get a PhD, and you should know and feel that no matter what things might get in your way, that you want to persevere and accomplish that. That's good to address what you said, Joe, for sure. I think my best piece of advice is really think about what you're passionate about and what you want to do. I'm doing a lot of things right now, and don't get me wrong, from day to day, it's stressful. And like it leaves me with less time than I'd want, but I really like what I do. I don't feel forced to do what I'm doing. I like the consulting, it fulfills some part of me. I like the teaching because it allows me to help others. Not necessarily because I like to physically be in a classroom and lecture. I don't imagine many people actually really like doing that, but reaching others and helping them in their careers is what I enjoy, and helping clients to get better so that their employees have a better experience fulfills me. So I'm able to do these things and it doesn't feel like a strain because I'm doing what I'm passionate about. So again, if you're not passionate about getting a certain degree or working in a certain spot, then think about what you're doing in your career and make sure you follow a path that hopefully either gets you to where you think you're going to be fulfilled, or at least helps you build skills that we all know are going to be valuable in helping you navigate a career and be fulfilled. So, I guess in closing, for me, in respect to your question, is don't think about the dollar signs of a job. Don't think about the prestige of a job, especially for a lot of people who might be listening who are early in their careers, as you said, or in school. Think about how you can build yourself up to have the experience and have some of the skills necessary to navigate a career. Like, how can you be add value? How can you be personally fulfilled? Because also, when times get hard, you'll be motivated because you're enjoying what you're doing. So again, you have to feel good about what you do. If you feel like you've locked yourself in because you are aspiring for someone else's aspirations or someone else's beliefs in you, or because you thought you wanted to be well known or recognized in IO, that's not going to get you through. So you really have to do things for yourself that are going to make you happy And like people say, if you do something you love, you never work a day in your life. That's kind of uh, BS, but the idea behind it is true. It definitely helps mitigate like stressors in life and like conflict and scope creep of your jobs if you feel like you're doing something that makes you happy and you don't feel like you've been forced into it. So take that approach to your career to do things that are going to make you useful and happy as opposed to being like rich and famous, because that's not what anybody needs.
It's great advice, and it's the type of advice that I think students need to hear a lot of the time, because if you just hear it once and then you see that job come up with that nice salary, you're like, nah, I didn't forget about that advice. I'm just gonna like try to go for that job. But it's absolutely true, and I feel like you don't fully understand it until you get that job where you're not happy, because then you understand the frustrations and the angers that can come with it when you don't feel fulfilled. I personally know that to be true with like previous jobs that I've had. Not even on the corporate side, just like growing up, like the jobs, everyday jobs you had when you were a teenager or like early career in college. Um, you're just like, oh, I don't really thought about that. I just want like the money. But it's absolutely true, and it should be echoed. So thank you for your advice, Mike, and thank you for coming on this podcast. It was a pleasure. We had a great time.
I had a good time too, and yeah, now we get to disseminate this to others and see how many either like what we all had to discuss today, or how many are going to come knocking on our doors to cancel us. Um,
The fall of the Brando and Joe podcast.
Mike Chetta giving his opinion, which is not the opinion of the University of Central Florida in any aspect or its employees. But yeah, I appreciate it. And I think these conversations are important because people who are going to programs sometimes only see their faculty or they only see the current cohorts. Yeah, you need that exposure to others who are working in alumni networks, which is also why, in an unnecessary way to add additional pain of saying this on the end, this is also why. And again, I'm not an ivory tower person, but this is the value of a well-oiled machine of a university that has programs that have been long-standing, long-running, and successful. That brick and mortar PhD and master's programs sometimes do provide more value because you can get these opinions from others and more easily access them than online. And again, I think some of that was, we've all lost some personal and social skills over what happened in the last few years by not physically interacting. But things like this give people an avenue to hear others' opinions that have been through it outside of the small group of cohorts and academics and professors that you see every day at university. It's nice to see when either things are mimicked or if they're different from others, to get that opinion so you can make a more informed decision in your career. And that's kind of where I'm at. Again, I'm not anti PhD. I just think I can provide value to others and they don't need that necessarily. But everybody can, obviously if I didn't have one, I couldn't do it, like I said before. So everybody just needs to think about that and kind of make their way and make sure, again, building their knowledge, talking to others, networking, building their brand. These are MBA things. But if you do that stuff, it helps you navigate much better than living in a narrow, myopic kind of little bubble of getting your grad degree at your chosen institution.
Yeah, 100% echoing everything that you said, Mike. We really do appreciate your time today and just your insight in general. Joe and I are looking forward to coming and stopping by the Talent Metrics booth at SIOP to see you again.
Yeah.
So,
Yes, please. Anybody who hears this, we have a booth. I think we're in the main area. We're in like the hotspot area because we're the side vendor, so they give us a nice booth. But we're there. I have a couple of presentations on AI with a couple of really really smart people, and yeah, I'm usually hanging around SIOP at this point. I went to a SIOP in 2004 was my first one, and now I've been going pretty consistently for the last 12 or 13 years when we've had them. But I'm always around and would love for people to come in, snap a selfie, bother me for something, ask me questions. So that would be great. I would love for everyone to do that.
Yeah, we'll post it on the LinkedIn. Nice little reunion pic. But yeah, thanks again, Mike, for joining us. We're excited for everyone to hear.
Not a problem. Thank you guys so much.
take care.
Take care. Bye bye.
That was a fun episode with Mike. It's great getting to chat with him about his experience. You can tell that he has experience in a lot of different areas, IO related or not IO related. Really feel like we got a really good, well rounded picture of master's, PhD, networking. Like, what were your thoughts, Joe?
Yeah, it's always fun hearing that side of like not getting a PhD because you always I feel like we don't hear that side a lot. It's always like maybe why you should go for a PhD or like why I went for my PhD, but not ever why I won't go for a PhD. So it's a fun topic to hear in neuropsychology, which is still very academic based. Um, those like sorts of reasons.
Yeah, it's interesting. I can definitely say I was guilty of being one of the people who said I'm going to go for my PhD and not knowing what that entailed. So it's still something that I'm interested in, but it's definitely something to put on the back burner for now. But like I learned that through my experience, and I think that Mike helps teach that to a lot of people, either through this podcast or through his own personal experience, like to really put in the thought that's going to go into going for your PhD. I think that we had a really nice discussion around
Yeah, well, never say never, Brandon. Down the line,
that. Same for
maybe
you.
we'll. Oh, I'll say never. But thank you, everybody, for listening. And we will catch you next week.
Yep. Catch you guys next week.